perspective as a worship leader who is in maybe 1 or 2 churches a week all the time. Understand that this is all I do. So let me point out a couple of points to you from the level of being a worship leader that might cause you to stir towards something. I believe that if you go to worship conferences and you read on worship books and you talk to worship thinkers and all the people that are in that lot, they will tell you that a big principle is that you're supposed to do familiar songs so that the people can be more easily entering in. And most of us go, yeah, I want to enter in. Can you do that song that I love? And there's nothing wrong with doing familiar songs. Nothing wrong with it. But many churches have made it either an idol or a program or even a rule that said if we throw the congregation off by doing something odd, then we're in the tall grass. I think there are churches that have gotten to the point where they're more interested in pleasing people than in pleasing God and growing people. And when a worship leader gives you everything that you think you need, he's not really growing you. He's only spoon-feeding your immaturity or your wounding. So when you consider this, maybe the worship leader's role is not to bring in the presence so much as to grow up the people in their worship so that they no longer need a worship leader. When someone no longer needs a worship leader, they're still going to gather corporately as the Bible commands us to because we need this. But now I don't care if it's a pipe organ or you have drums or it's a zither. I don't care if I know the song or not. I don't care if the melody's easy to grasp or not. I'm going to worship God with the fullness of my being when it's not very familiar. So I would submit to you the idea that if you need familiar songs to worship, that maybe some growth in your approach to worship should happen. The second concept I want to just throw out at you that's related to this. I have a certain different definition of worship that I don't think a lot of people have, that I've arrived at through my process with the Lord. I believe that prayer and intercession is us speaking up to God. And God speaking down to us and through us is the prophetic. Everybody kind of know what I'm talking about there? But you know what worship is? It's those two things happening at the same time in conversation and in communion. It's God talking to us. It's us talking to God. And this conversation that takes place, sometimes I see is disconnected when the worship leader is performing a song over and over, and we are performing this act that our culture says is this is how we worship. And God is just saying, I'm lying on top of you right now, breathing your breath. And that's our worship. I heard it said recently that worship, if restricted to just the idea of music, is sort of like love restricted just to the idea of kissing. Because there's so much more, right? There's so much more. I would submit to you that if worship, by my definition, is us talking to God in intercession and God speaking down to us and through us in the prophetic, and that communion of conversation happening at the same time, if that's the case, then I would submit to you further that in that conversation, I'm not just bringing a prayer of a certain topic, but He is seeing me bringing the fullness and totality of who I am, warts and all, my failures and my triumphs, the woundings, the strongholds, my gifts and talents, the wisdom that I have attained, the wisdom that I haven't. He's taking all of who I am in that moment and receiving that to himself, and in worship, responding by bringing the totality and fullness of who he is into the conversation. All of the fullness, all of the grandeur and the beauty and the Father's heart and the love and the creative identity and all of who he is coming into that conversation when we worship. So I would submit to you further. The more you understand who you are, the deeper your worship becomes. Because now the conversation has that much more depth to it and resonance and can go a lot more places. Because worship is literally you bringing your fullness to the conversation of God.